Judy Collins is an award-winning singer-songwriter. She's captivated audiences with her signature sublime voice and social activism for more than 4 decades. Her 1968 single, Both Sides Now, won a Grammy Award for Best Folk Performance, and in 2003 she was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. She's been called the voice of American folk music, and there's no disputing that she's deserving of the title.
Hello, my darling, what do you know? Open the door and come on in. I'm so glad to see you, my friend. You're like a rainbow coming around the bend. And when I see you happy, well, it sets my heart free. I'd like to be as good a friend to you as you are to me.
Since 1995, Judy Collins has served as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador and has traveled extensively supporting projects around the world. She continues to raise funds for the UNICEF national committees. She donates proceeds from her concerts and royalties from guitar sales. The author of several books, she recently released her memoir, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, My Life in Music. She joins us today to discuss her career, her activism, and her work with UNICEF. Judy Collins, welcome to Full Frame.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
I mentioned Both Sides Now. When you first saw those lyrics, heard them, did you just say, this is gold, this is going to be there for years and years and years to come?
Oh, yes, I did. And in fact, it was a funny way that I found the song, because it was 1967, and I was sound asleep up here on the Upper West Side. And my phone rang at 3 in the morning, and it was Al Cooper, who started the Blues Project and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He and I were very good friends. He had my phone number, and I often wonder what would have happened if he'd called Buffy or Joan B., you know. But he called me and he said, listen, did I wake you? And I said, you did, but so what's the big issue here? Why are you calling me in the middle of the night? He said, well, I'm sitting here with this singer-songwriter. I followed her home because she said she wrote songs, and then he put Joni Mitchell on, and she sang me Both Sides Now.
Oh, man, what an incredible moment.
And I said, well, let's see, I'll be over right away. And that's what happened. Of course, I recorded it immediately, and thank you to Joni Mitchell.
Rows and flows of angel hair and ice cream castles in the air, feathered canyons everywhere. I've looked at clouds that way, and now they only block the sun. They rain and snow on everyone. So many things I would have done, but clouds got in my way. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, up and down, and still somehow it's clouds' illusions I recall. I really don't know clouds at all.
So then, as we move along in time, you've had all these hits, and yet, you know, when did you get the bug to be an activist, do you think? Because folk music kind of leads to that in a sense, doesn't it?
Well, yes, but that also came from my father, because he was very big on talking about everything. I mean, he was outspoken to the nth degree, and people who spoke out the way he did were often lost their jobs. I mean, somebody who talked about the McCarthy hearings in the way that he did on Denver radio, John Henry Falk was doing the same thing in Texas, and he got canned. Mm-hmm. You know, they didn't want to hear from him. But people adored my father, and because he was the kind of character he was, and because he cared about people, and he was very much a part of the community, they let him spout off on anything, and he did so at home or on the radio. And he always told us that we had to be part of the solution, and if we didn't vote, we had no say in anything. So I was really primed for that. And of course, the 60s came along, and I always never thought of not opposing the war in Vietnam. My father used to talk about, you know, Dien Bien Phu, and how, you know, what are we doing over there? I mean, the French have just lost this war. What are we doing with advisors there? We're on a very bad path. So I was very much a part of my generation and a part of my my own upbringing and somebody who wanted to make a difference. But there was never any question that I would be involved, and that I would then take all those things that I'd gathered as a child, the discipline, the piano playing, the practicing, the way that I chose songs, which was the way that my father chose songs. And I had that background in my growing up, which was very much about discipline. And I started to perform at about 4 years old, very early age.
Wow. Do you think it's kind of a, because you have this position and this voice, is it a duty to call attention to things that you feel passionate about? I mean, especially given the fact that your father kind of raised you the way he did, or is that just kind of the making of a good folk singer?
Well, excuse me for saying well, I find that I say it more often than I would like to. There are reasons to develop a way of speaking about things. Well, if you're a writer and you write your pieces for the New Yorker, then you pay attention to what's going on in the world around you, whatever your profession is. And as a songwriter and a singer, I pay attention. I wrote a song about 9/11 that I feel very strongly about. I wrote a song because the first time I went to travel for UNICEF, I went to the former Yugoslavia, and I was the man who headed up UNICEF asked me to write a song about the situation with landmines and with children in the former Yugoslavia, which I did. So the song for Sarajevo came out of my two visits to Sarajevo and to that part of the world.
Well, so Sarajevo, do those images linger with you afterwards? The children, the landmines, the devastation?
Very, very much. My husband and I, well, we knew nothing about landmines. They're not, somebody might find a mine from the Civil War that hasn't gone off, but of course they're very ancient, and the chances of their still being active are pretty slim. But we didn't know about landmines here. We went to Sarajevo, we went to Dubrovnik. Outside of Dubrovnik, we were taken to a little school where there was a lecture. The main concern was educating children about landmines, and UNICEF had just started a program of education for children, a kind of a psychological art program in which they had 7 lessons, and they would sit down and they would draw and paint, and the first 3 or 4 sessions would be nothing but fire coming out of the sky and bombs falling on houses and children running in agony from harm. And then by the time they got to the last session, they would be painting flowers, putting themselves in the picture. I mean, this is direct action on post-traumatic stress disorder. And these were children, little children, all ages. And the people we were traveling with in UNICEF, members of UNICEF, took us to a school, and there was a table at the bottom of this hall, and across the table were scattered mines, various kinds of mines, the most recent of which were plastic. Now we're talking about a world, we don't know it because we don't live there. In the rest of the world of martial conflict, there are millions of landmines. Of course, Vietnam is filled with them, 300 million, they think, alone in Vietnam. And on this table were scattered all these mines, and the most recent are made of plastic, and they're designed to look like candy wrappers and Coke bottles. UNICEF has tried very hard to educate all over the world, and they've done a beautiful job of it. But still, of course things happen. Of course people blow up. And if you've got 300 only, that's a very conservative, in one country alone, you've got millions of these things. Yes, well, so the vividness of the place and the things that people are struggling with, it's very real.
And what's great about this story, the example you gave, is somebody who's in the arts, who performs, to see how art can help these kids to kind of process and to move from the explosions to perhaps getting past the PTSD.
Yes, exactly.
Pretty incredible.
At the time I was there, I was friendly with the woman who was the president of DC Comics. She and I and the State Department and Hillary Clinton conspired to have DC Comics put out a comic book starring Superman. Now, everyone in the world knows Superman, even these children in dire straits, living in close to poverty levels in many parts of the world, they know who Superman is. And so the design and the production and the distribution of this comic book was something that I was very happy to be any part of, and it was distributed to children and all over the world and helped them to understand that there were things they could do to protect themselves.
Explain for us the joy of being on stage and just knocking one out of the park and the adulation of the fans and walking off the stage. What's that sentiment like? What's the feeling like?
Well, first of all, every performance is different because it's always new, it's always fresh. Yes, there are sometimes repeated parts of your repertoire, things that you might have sung for 50 years if you're lucky. But there are new things going on. But the event itself is always new. It's always fresh. Different people, different date, different time, different place. I also truly believe that music, as in the case of art, can heal people. And I consider it a service. I consider the stress that goes through getting there a service. And when you do get there, you always think you're there for one reason, and then it turns out that it's a little different. The other night I was with the orchestra, the Portland Symphony in Portland, Oregon, conducted by a 24-year-old wonderful conductor. Norman Huen is his name. And the orchestra is magnificent. One of the songs that I sang is a song that I wrote about my mother called In the Twilight. She died about 4 years ago. And it is a song in which I've kind of put every loaded barrel I could find about who she was and what her life was like.
She's a lady, and she barely knows her name now. In the twilight as she sleeps, and her memories chase her down the days of childhood. There was music, always music, and her brothers. There was Robert, the captain of a freighter that sailed to China.
And I played it with the orchestra, and people came up to me afterwards in tears, and they said, things like, my mother just died last year, my mother's in hospice right now, I was so close to my mother, and I don't find a way that I can sort of mourn her, and the song helped me do that. You never know when that's going to happen with a particular song that you're singing, that you've chosen to sing, and that you find healing and transformative.
And as you heard from the people there that night, obviously it's a gift to all of us, as are you. I can't tell you how many scratches there were on your albums growing up, but thank you so much. Fantastic talking to you.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
When we come back, more Star Power, working for the global good.